preparing to live stream the meeting right now.
Fantastique. Says we're now streaming live.
Because we are now streaming live.
Hello and welcome.
Episode 3 of Join the Dots.
Today is Tuesday, the something of October.
The something
27th.
is
27th of October.
We're into the last bit of the year.
Yeah.
So last week we talked about talking. We talked about communication and communicating. And I thought you gave a really amazing description of how you teach, how you set up. Well, it's not even teach. Would you call it teach? It's the learning experiences.
Yeah, I'd call it teach because...
You call it teaching?
Yeah, I'd call it teaching, even though in many ways it wasn't what you might picture when you picture teaching. It was still teaching. And I just gave my students a lot of freedom about what they learned and how they learned it. And often that would be coming to me and going,
this is important. This is very important.
Yeah. I mean, that's really...
And the reason this is important is because... Well, there's a bit of a lag. But the reason this is important is because there's a difference between teaching and learning. And today we're going to talk all about learning and join some dots. Here it is.
Speaking of learning, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about teaching and learning. This is a friend of mine who you may know from many, many years ago, but I don't know if they'd want me to put their name out live on YouTube. So, so I'm not going to. But she's a teacher and is not very happy teaching at the moment. And I said I'd be really happy to talk to her about alternative education. I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I mentioned it to her and she came back to me saying, you know, it's half term. Have you got any time? So we spent an hour on the phone yesterday talking about education, the education system, teaching, learning, that whole BOW, and ball of wax.
Yeah. Okay. I just realized what it was.
Yeah, the whole ball of wax. And one of, and I gave her a number of authors and a number of books to go and look at. And one of them I went to find, and then I couldn't find it on my bookshelf. And I've been going nuts trying to find it on my bookshelf, and I still can't find it. It's called, and maybe I lent it to you. Maybe you've got it. The book's called How We Learn.
What's the book?
How We Learn by Benedict. Oh, I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, I read it. You didn't lend it to me. Benedict Carey. I read it. I read it last year.
What was it?
Carey.
Yeah, that's right.
Carey, like Mariah.
Or Jim. Depends on the spelling.
There's only one R in it, so it's Mariah, not Jim. Great book.
Reminds me of
really interesting book.
Do you remember MTV's Celebrity Deathmatch?
Yes. Yes, I do.
There was a really great Mariah Carey, Jim Carey one, which I think might have been, was it Drew Carey? There was like a Carey versus Carey match.
Who's Drew Carey?
Carey, I can't remember. I'm sure it was Carey. Can't remember. Like, you're pulling out the, memories from the deepest, darkest depths of my mind.
My sister told me that Beavis and Butthead is on Amazon Prime if you want to buy it. Not free, you can buy it on Amazon to watch. I'm really tempted just to watch Beavis and Butthead again. I just love it. It's so good.
Great.
Anyway, How We Learn by Benedict Carey, which I've read.
You start there.
We started there. I think a better place to
We haven't.
start is
James? Do
so
we
you
have a
spoke
terrible,
about a
terrible
ball
lag?
of wax.
We've got a terrible lag on this
We
call.
do. I might. I'm gonna move because it's me. It's always me.
Is it?
So we're gonna go on a little. Yeah, it's always me. Ready? I'm gonna go really close so I can hide. You see my nostrils and my moustache. It's gonna go dark.
We should talk about moustaches as well.
It's gonna go. We could talk about moustaches.
I think it would be remiss of us not to.
Well, I'm trying to look, and it would be. This is the last time I'm going to have a moustache for a while.
So you think all the shuffling about is going to help with our time lag?
Closer to the router.
Okay.
I promise you it will. Promise
Okay,
you. Because I've done this on another live.
Okay, great. Well,
And now I'm going to get my laptop charger.
it's the epitome of professionalism, this, isn't it?
Look, I told you. Go and watch Joe Rogan's episode 1 and you will be horrified at how bad it is.
I believe you. I don't
Horrified.
need to go watch it. I trust that it was bad.
Let me join some dots, okay, and pick a starting point. So,
Yeah, go for life.
and I was doing that before you went down a hole which was relevant. So while you were talking about the bag of worms or ball of wax, you were talking about learning. One of the things we talked about last week was you've had all sorts of educational and learning experience. Now, education is different from learning. Learning is a whole other thing, and that's the theme of today's Join the Dots Forward. But I think it would be really interesting point to start of the different types of educational establishment that you've learned. I was going to say tried to learn in. Maybe that's not the right phrase.
I don't know. I wouldn't say in many of them I tried very hard. So, might not be the right phrase exactly.
You're going to have to explain that. You're going to have to explain it. You have to explain that. You really are.
Okay, well, let me answer the question, even though I know you know the answer, but for anyone that might still be watching live on YouTube or in watching the recording, if they managed to get through these first 5 minutes, then better man than me. Yeah, so I went to a number of different schools growing up, and not just a number of different schools, but a number of different types of school. I went to state schools, I went to Steiner schools, 2 different Steiner schools. I went to state school again. I was home educated. I went to a democratic school, and then I went to circus school after all of that.
Was that in chronological order, roughly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was the least worst?
The least worst. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually not going to call it the least worst, because the actual best was neck and neck, home ed and the democratic school.
And both of those were better than the circus school?
In terms of the learning experience, yes.
Okay.
I had a really great time at circus school, and it was an entire that was university level. And I think part of the problem there was that they tried to deliver a university level course. It was a BA honors degree, and at the same time they treated people like children. like being told what to do, when to do it, what to learn,
Oh,
like,
that's
which
yeah,
is
right.
not
Okay.
what most university level courses are. Students are given a lot more autonomy in what they do, and they weren't
Yeah.
great at that. And I think they weren't great at that because at least at that time, and maybe even still, I don't know because I'm not involved with it. You know, it's been 20 something, 20 odd years
It
since,
has now.
and it's been, 18 months since I was even in the building,
Mm.
Um, but, they treated the students there who were adult students, and some were very adult students. One of my classmates was in his 30s. He was a mature student, and
Hmm.
and everyone was still treated like, like they weren't given responsibility for what they were doing and what they were learning. They were
So the
treated,
autonomy thing we were talking about before.
yeah. So if we're talking about the actual learning experience, home ed and the democratic school, and I'd probably even say the democratic school for me had the edge, because home ed for me at that point in my life was really a backlash against the system. The state system, Steiner, which is kind of the two that I'd been through. Both early, like primary and secondary,
Mm.
two different Steiner schools and a couple of different state schools. It was a backlash, and I just wanted to get out. There wasn't really a lot of freedom in it, but I don't mean I didn't have the freedom to do what I want. I did, but I was just as trapped out of school as I was in school, and really that was my deschooling process. And I had to go through that deschooling process before I was ready to take ownership of my own learning. And at that point, I decided to go to Sands School in Ashburton in Devon,
Which is a democratic school.
which is the democratic school. Now, at the democratic school, you don't have to go to lessons. And for the first, I don't know.
Well, hang on. The pause just before we get to there. Just before we get to there, it's worth, I think, saying everyone thinks school is state school. You have a uniform, you go to school, the teacher teaches you. It's that when you say school, it evokes that kind of image. So you've used the phrase democratic school, circus school, and Steiner school. So if we think traditional school is you turn up, you're told what to learn, teacher teaches you, you go home, you write, you read some books, you do what the teacher tells you, and there's no agency over what you're learning. There's agency or autonomy. There's not this. You have to do everything you're told. Do you think that was what you were railing against?
Yeah. Before I answer that, let me just refine one of the things that you said. You said when people think of school, they think of state school, and that may not be true. They may also think of private schools. They may think, some may think of, public schools or boarding schools or whatever. There are other types of school that people will have in mind when we talk
They're
about
thinking of a traditional
school.
Classroom environment,
Exactly.
teacher, pupils.
Exactly.
That power dynamic.
Exactly. The power dynamic of the teacher is in charge, and the student is there to learn, and the teacher teaches and the student learns.
Yeah.
And it's the teacher's job to impart some knowledge, and it's the learner's job to receive that knowledge. And it goes beyond that, and it goes beyond some things that you talked about, which is that school really school whether you're talking about state, Steiner, private, whatever, if you're talking about typical traditional education,
yeah,
it goes way beyond just teacher's job is to teach and student's job is to learn. It's that students have to do what they're told when they're told. Go here, wear this, wear what you're told, the way that you're told. I mean, the number of times you've talked to me about telling people to tuck their shirt in and do their tie up and, blah.
Yeah, my job, the way I say it now, is my job is to tell young people what to do where to go, why to do it, how to think, how to dress, how to stand. And then I'm supposed to set them off into the world.
It goes even further.
Probably
It's
does.
it's what to do, when to do it, where to go, what to do when they get there, what they should wear. You said that. When they can go outside, when they can go to the toilet.
It's true.
If they don't do it, it's punitive. It's
Yep.
under threat of, well, if you don't do what I say when I say it, the way that I say it, then you won't be allowed to go outside, or you'll have to write me 100 lines, or you won't be allowed to go on this school trip, or you'll whatever that is.
Yep.
No, it's do it or else.
And if you look at school policies, behaviour policies, and you look at a prison's rules, it's difficult to tell the difference between the two.
Oh yeah, I mean they're the only two institutions that are bordered by a fence where you're told what to do, where to go, what to wear, when you can speak, when you can go to the loo. You know, they're the only two institutions where that is the case. You know, if anyone's job was like that, they'd walk out in a moment. You know, and some people experience their job like that and feel trapped because of it. Like, they don't like their job if they experience it being like that.
So that's the school bit.
That's school.
And then
that's school, and that's what most people know.
and where does Steiner fit into that before we get to democratic?
Okay, so
And deschooling.
Sure. So Steiner is an alternative pedagogy based on the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. I actually don't know a huge amount about his philosophy. In my experience of being at two schools, and you know, my younger brother being there as well for many years, and knowing lots and lots of people who went to Steiner schools and having conversations about Steiner schools, but I am by no means an expert and I've never read any of his philosophies. They are very traditional. The curriculum is quite different.
Oh, okay.
You know, and there's probably some variance in them around the world. But they're very traditional. You know,
Teacher,
20 or 30
people.
20 or 30 students in a class, teacher who's in charge, rows of desks, you know, do what you're told, then go outside.
Okay.
You know, and, you know, the ones that I went to, and I imagine all of them, because it's probably in line with the philosophy, is, you know, there's no school uniform. When I was there, it was like no school uniform, but you can't wear things with like big graphics. Right?
That's not Calvin and Hobbes. It's Gandalf and some hobbit.
Yeah, exactly. As count, you know, Calvin and Hobbes / and Wild Stallions. Very nice.
Yep.
But yeah, you and I would not be allowed to wear those T-shirts at the Steiner.
At Steiner school. Okay.
You can wear what you want, but you can't wear, you know, big graphics. And the curriculum is different. Like there's a lot more emphasis on art and a lot more emphasis on movement, you know, a lot less emphasis on, you know, reading, writing, arithmetic, at least initially. So they start that stuff much later. And there's a whole, like, you know, philosophy of child development that's based on. But aside from the curriculum and some of the philosophy behind it, they're very traditional.
Same. Wow.
Yeah. I don't particularly rate Steiner schools.
This is what's interesting for me in how much I've learned about schools, home ed, unschooling, and learning, is that I was very much in the paradigm of the box of this is how you learn. You're young, teacher tells you, that's it. That was what learning was for me. And to say any different was, I couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And when I talk about when I've talked about unschooling with colleagues, and when I was talking about unschooling with some of my old friends, or learning outside school, it was the same things would come up, and it was like, but how do you learn? but how do they discover it? How do they learn to read and write? Or how do they socialize? It's the same kinds of things, but it's
Yeah, that's a great
interesting.
one. I love that one.
I know.
How do
It's
you learn to socialize? God, schools have been around for like a couple of 100 years. Like, what
yeah.
did people do before school? How did anyone ever socialize for 10,000 years or more? What have we done? Oh my God.
Mm, mm,
And actually, like, there are I'd argue that socialization in school is stunted and backward.
yeah.
You don't get real socialization in school. What you
Yep.
get is a hierarchy. You have
Yep.
teachers are more important than students, and the younger students. If you were in the year below me, I was superior and you were inferior. So you don't get cross year group socialization,
Yep.
and you could
Yep.
be a week or even a day apart in age because of that arbitrary August
Yep.
September cutoff line. You could be like you could even have someone in the year below who's older than someone in the year above on occasion, but you can't socialize because they are either inferior or superior. And you definitely don't socialize with the adults. You spend
Mhm.
7 hours a day around adults that you can't socialize with.
It's a
You
very
can't have a meaningful conversation with them and learn, how do I relate to someone who's 3 years older than me? How do I
yep.
relate to someone who's 20 years older than me
Yep.
or younger than me?
And then teachers will moan about having a conversation with a pupil, and another pupil just talks across them. I've had that experience where I'm in-depth conversation with a pupil about some random, I don't know, Star Wars, and then another pupil, however old they are, will just come and start talking to me in the middle of the conversation. That sense of now I learned a lot of those how to interact like that from being around multi-generational big family gatherings
Yes.
where there were like 10 conversations happening at once and everyone's sitting in a room and it's all like mad, but it works. And occasionally it will come together and then it splits off and then it moves. That's how I learned how, and that's why I think my sister and I are so very good at being in a room with a lot of people. Not school. School wasn't, didn't, I mean, that it's such a contrived environment.
Yeah. I mean, really, the only time that anyone gets an opportunity to socialize is during those very short break periods.
Yeah.
Out of a 7 hour day, you get like, I mean, what do you have at your school in terms
So
of break
we have a
time?
morning break that's 20 minutes and
20.
then there's lunch, which is about an hour, but they probably get about half an hour, 40 minutes of like meaningful, like messing around play. But even then, they might be doing other things. There might be a lunchtime club, or they might be doing something else, and that's it.
Nothing after that. There's a break in the morning and a lunch break, and that's it.
Yeah, starts at 8:30 registration, finishes at 4, and then there's co-curricular after school, and there's 5 minutes in between each lesson, which is movement. But that's it to go from lesson to lesson.
So you got 6.5 hours, 8:30 till 4.
Yeah,
Right? Is my maths right there? 6.5 hours of a school day, and an hour. I can't do the
your
maths
face.
in my head, like what kind of percentage that is, but it's not like you spend all your day socializing and learning to socialize.
No, you don't. Not at all. So it's the the point that I find really interesting is how stuck I was in the box of this is how you learn, this is why schools are good, this is why it's really important. And then as I came across ideas, as I came across John Taylor Gatto stuff, as I came across the idea of first it was home ed, now it's unschooling and play. I began to realize there's a whole I've learning isn't just what I think it is. I've been in a tiny little box about what learning is.
Mm.
And it's really interesting hearing what you say about Steiner. I didn't realize it was that traditional.
Yeah.
Now, what about before you went to the democratic school, you used this phrase deschooling.
Yeah.
That sounds quite cool. because I've not heard that before. I have an imagination. I have an imaginary idea of what that is. But you said the process of deschooling.
Yeah. So when it's a term that's used within talking about home education,
Okay.
that, and particularly, as you get towards the unschooling end of the home ed spectrum.
And you probably hinted at this when you structured your lessons last week when we were talking. When you talked about how you said that some people you'd be like, you can do this. They go, but tell me what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
deschooling is, how would you
Deschooling.
describe it?
Deschooling is the process of, God, how would you say it? There may even be a definition. It's the process of like unlearning everything that you've learned about how you learn and how you can learn and how you should learn.
You sounded a bit like Yoda there.
Yeah, it's like, detox for a drug addict.
Okay.
It is that process of being totally paralyzed by, like, how do I do this now? I've always, like, those students that would come into my class and be like, great,
Yeah.
go, what do you want to do? I don't know.
Yeah.
They've spent so many years being told what to do that they don't know how to do it for themselves. And it's this process of undoing all of that and rediscovering that you can learn, and you can learn things that you're really interested in and passionate about and, like, authentically interested in.
And that was kind of like, you pushed the boundaries quite a lot, didn't you?
In what way?
Well, I remember you telling me about going to the democratic school, that you don't have to go to lessons at the democratic school.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you quite said it this way, but you said, all right, then, what if I don't have to go? I'm not going to go. And you just didn't.
So I think maybe for 6 or 8 weeks, I didn't go to any lessons when I got there. So I spent a couple of years doing home ed, right? And,
okay, yeah.
Right, I spent a couple of years doing home ed, and then I decided that I wanted to go to SANS.
But home ed was a teacher at home?
No, home ed was largely unschooling, that I was able to do whatever I wanted. And I was in my teens at that point. I was 14, 15, 16,
okay.
17, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I forget exactly, somewhere around there. Yeah, it must have been 14, because I was like early GCSE stage, 14, 15, 16, and then I did my A-levels at SANS, and I was there for a few years. So it was largely unstructured. And for me, it was just a deschooling process. It was mostly staying up late, sleeping in really late, and getting stoned for most of the day.
And last week, you talked about the difference between home ed at one end and unschooling, that kind of spectrum. So where would you have put your home ed experience?
Way in the unschooling end.
Oh, over here, okay.
And there were a couple of things that I was interested in, and one of which was music. And I went and I did a music GCSE that was like a extracurricular GCSE class that was run by a guy called Julian Marshall, who back in the 70s was a pop star. He was the Marshall part of the Marshall Haynes band.
Okay.
Had a hit called Dancing in the City. Dancing in the City.
Okay.
You can look it up. It was like a, top 10, top 5. I think it was like maybe even number 3 in the UK.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was a big hit. Anyway, he ran a GCSE music class locally, and I decided I wanted to join on that. I was into playing guitar, so I spent some time getting stoned and playing guitar. I'd spend a lot of time juggling. So getting stoned and juggling. I did. My parents got me a maths tutor because I was interested in maths. I was just good at maths, and it wasn't even that I was particularly interested in maths. I was just good at maths. I could do it, so it was easy. I was like, okay, well, I'll do maths. So I'd go to a maths tutor's house once or twice a week, and I'd learn. But it was by choice.
Yeah.
What else did I do? my parents found a guy who taught me English and photography, and mostly I just did the photography part of it. Didn't really want to write about stuff particularly, but he'd take me out in his little convertible sports car and we'd go drive around Dartmoor and take photographs, and he'd ask me to write about stuff, and I wouldn't really write about stuff. But I'd do the photography, and I was into the photography.
When I was doing my GCSEs, I didn't have the choice. They didn't offer music GCSE. I would have loved to do that. I was so obsessed. I'm pretty obsessed with guitar, but didn't offer it at my school.
Yeah.
Rubbish.
But I did those few things, by choice, and so there was like an hour and a half here and there through the week on various days where I had some like lessons. So, but largely it was unstructured, and I spent a lot of my time juggling. It's where although I'd learned to juggle when I was about I don't know 9 or 10 years old, maybe, something like that. It wasn't until that I really got into it, and that's when I really got into it. And I really
like hours
and hours and hours and hours I'd spend juggling.
Hours with anything? Did you get clubs? Was it just
mostly balls? And some clubs. Oh, and then there was a juggling club that I'd go to on a Friday night.
Wow.
And that was like, and I was absolutely reliable at going to those things.
Because you wanted to.
Exactly,
because I was massively into it.
Yeah, my parents didn't have to force me or coerce me or bribe me or any of those things. It's like, oh, it's Friday night. I'm not going to go get stoned. I'm going to go juggle. Then I'll go get stoned.
So that process of being home, so school happened, home ed, and then as you got older, you were kind of like exploring your own. It sounds like you were exploring your own sense of who you were and your own sense of autonomy of what you could do, what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And discovering what you like.
I spent a lot of time hanging out with my friends, and that's really an age, that early teen phase is an age where, developmentally speaking,
yes,
young people need, and it is like a biological, neurological need to find their place in the social world.
Yep.
And for better or worse, I had created an environment where I was able to do that.
Mm.
And it was definitely for better because, I was on a pretty bad track, with the truant officers and everything before that.
Now, speaking about truant officers, I remember a story you told me, and it goes to this idea of maths. You enjoyed maths.
Yeah.
You told me a story about how you were in a maths class once and you'd figured something out and you wanted to help someone.
Yes. That was at the Steiner School.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that was at the Steiner School. And yeah, God. We'd been given a task. I finished it. I could see one of my friends on the other side of the room struggling. I went over to help them. And the teacher just let rip at me. Get back to your seat. What are you doing?
Really? Wow.
And I was like, I'm finished. I'm helping them. I was like, get back over there. Sit your ass down. Like that. And I went over, I sat down, I turned to the person next to me, I went, I think I should leave. Should I leave? I went, okay. And I picked up my stuff and I walked out. I left the school. I can't remember if that's when I actually left the school, like if I walked out and I never went back. I don't think it is. I must have been 13 at the time, but it was, in pretty short order that I left the school after that. Yeah.
And yet you hear about the things that are valued in the workplace are collaboration and helping each other and problem solving and the ability to like spot when someone else is struggling so you can actually work together on something, and that sense of being in something together.
Yeah,
And
being
here you were.
part of a team and playing to your strengths, and
Yep.
yeah, school
Yeah.
doesn't. School says that that's what they do, and but the reality on the ground is that it doesn't.
As a full-time teacher, I agree.
Yeah,
And however much schools try to bring in some new way of thinking, it doesn't change the lack of autonomy. It doesn't change the lack of even relatedness. But those three things I mentioned before, the autonomy, the relatedness, and the competence, doesn't change but the autonomy is a really big one. That children, anybody can discover their own thing when they're into it, and develop and become good at something when they really go for it. But when it's take away that autonomy, you take away so much other stuff.
yeah,
And that power dynamic is always there. Someone
yeah,
else is more important than someone else because of something that somebody else said, regardless of how good you are at something, regardless of how much competence you demonstrate in a subject. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because they're old. They're going to be better, or whatever. Because I'm the teacher. So it's yeah, it does. It does. And to try, and what I find really interesting is to try and talk about learning within or unlearning or deschooling or unschooling within that environment. It's really hard.
yeah.
It's really difficult because people, some of my colleagues have been like, "What do you what? Yeah, but how do they socialize? Yeah, but like the
And it's so let's address that, right? How do they socialize if they're not at school and they're not around other kids? How do they socialize, right? So we've already talked about how real socialization doesn't really happen in school,
yep,
right? Or it does in a very limited, very narrow capacity, both
yes,
in terms of the time available and who they're really able to talk to. Outside of school in home ed, you can look, you can home ed well and you can home ed badly. And I'm not talking about the spectrum and where you sit on that spectrum of unschooling to, scheduled up the yin yang, right? Wherever you sit on that spectrum, you can do it well and you can do it badly. And often when you see things in the press, you see it in the press because it's done badly.
yep,
The media saying is, in newspapers, is, if it bleeds, it leads. Right? So something done really badly sells way better than something done really well. Something that's a bit more graphic and a bit more, extremist or a bit more whatever, it'll sell better. So it is that people are absolutely right. How do they socialize? Well, it could be done well and it could be done badly. When it's done well, people get together in a community.
yep,
It's very rare that home edders don't have a community of home edders. Doesn't mean they get together every day. Like tomorrow, I'm taking Albie to go and meet some friends who home ed. We're meeting 2:00 tomorrow afternoon. We're going to go to the playground. He's going to socialize. We're going to socialize. Their 4-year-old and 6-year-old are going to socialize with their mum and me and Albie, who's 3 3/4. Like we're all going to socialize together. That's how you socialize, because you don't do it in isolation. If you do it in isolation, you're not going to socialize, or you'll have limited socialization with your immediate family and your contacts, and that'll be it. It'll be a very small scope. But if you go back and think about things from an evolutionary perspective, we are supposed to be community creatures.
yep,
We're community beings, and really we should be socializing in a community. People know the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, right?
yeah,
It does. It takes a village to raise a child.
yeah,
And the child should be learning from the entire village, and they should feel safe with all the people in the village because they know the people in the village, and they're free to have autonomy within the village because people are looking out for each other. And that aspect of things has broken down in modern life. We're not surrounded by, I don't know, let's say 150 people who are part of our tribe. And we know each other and we can relate to each other, and we can We can track those relationships. You know, Dunbar's number, right? You can track the relationships with about 150 people.
There is another stereotype that goes with that you hear about in the media about home ed. Somebody wasn't succeeding at school, had particular needs, parent took them out of school, home educated them, and they're doing so much better. But that's the kind of, they're by themselves, the parent, and then it becomes really hard work for the parents. There's no talk of community. There's no talk of how home editors will actually meet up and find each other. There's no talk of that. There's no talk of that idea of it takes a village to raise a child. It's no, this child had problems in school, taken out, taught at home, it was better, but now they don't know
because they had problems.
Friends. Because they had problems, yes. That's the thing that you hear. And then the other thing you hear about home ed in the media is, oh, there's a potential safeguarding issue because they're not at school, they're being home educated. So there could be a safeguarding issue. Oh, we don't know what's going on. And it's because people don't know. People don't know the range of experience. Now, I'm glad you qualified it. You can do it well, you can do it badly, but the home education, unschooling, these are terms that a lot of people don't know about. And they have a particular idea. School is this, or school or learning or teaching in a classroom is this, home education is this, and you're supposed to send your child to school.
Yeah.
And that's how they're supposed to learn.
Yeah, and let's not forget that there could be safeguarding issues in a school as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There are many, many, many reported cases of teachers in school, not doing the job that they were paid to do, let's say.
Yeah. And part of my training as a teacher is to be aware of all the safeguarding potential signs and know what the process is and take care of duty of care and all this kind of stuff with the young people in my charge.
Yeah, I tell you what's interesting is that school is one of the only, if not the only, place where you won't vet the person who's going to be teaching your child. When was the last time a parent?
You mean as a parent?
As a parent, yeah. When was the last time
as a consumer?
When was the last time a parent asked to see your CV? When was the last time a parent asked to see your qualifications or certification? Like, you just kind of assume that they're good. Like, oh yeah, they did, their teacher training. I'll entrust them with, even the guy who comes to do the boilers. Like, are you Corgi certified? Okay, great, good. Corgi, great. It's not Corgi anymore. What is it? Gas safe.
Yeah.
Like, if I was going to entrust my child to someone else, I'd want to know that they were not just competent, but they were really good.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't vet their teachers in that way. They might meet them briefly once before they go to the school. And then what? How often do you have a parents' evening?
Once a year.
Right. Once a year. For how long? 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the parents are trusting the institution that the school is. So then it becomes about how good the school is, not the individual teachers.
Which is not really about how good the school is. It's about how well they can get kids to pass an exam.
Yes.
And there's other things that Ofsted might say to go like, they're good, they're outstanding, they're,
And then it becomes about gamifying those standards. Can I show in my class that I'm meeting these standards? If I am, therefore I'm a good teacher. If our school can show that we're meeting these standards, therefore we're a good school. That and those standards are created by Ofsted, the government, whoever, another institution. And it's always a bit like it's pushed onto someone else rather than someone themselves having to do the thinking.
Yeah.
You take it on trust. Whereas it makes complete sense that you'd want the best for your child. And whoever your child is with, you want them to make sure that you
absolutely
can make your own judgment about what they're like before your child is around them.
Yeah.
Build the community that you want, build the village that you want to bring up your child.
I mean, people vet their babysitters better than they vet their teachers.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Really? I tell you what's interesting, just a little sidebar on this, is everyone thinks they've got an experience of home ed this year.
That's very interesting. They do, don't they? Oh, yeah, that's
Oh
true.
God, home ed's really hard. Oh yeah. Oh, it's so hard. That's what people say to me at the moment. Oh, wouldn't want to do that. Oh, that was hard. 3 months.
No, it's true. It's true because there
Anyone
again.
who's watching this video, anyone who's watching this video in 10 years' time, we're recording this a couple of months post lockdown 2020.
But it's that idea again of what you have to do. Home education is when you teach your children at home.
Yes, that's the
You
perception.
have to be a teacher at home with those children.
But I'm not a teacher. How am I supposed to teach?
Well, how did you teach them before they went to school? You didn't. They just learned because they're humans and their brains are like sponges.
Yeah.
They're obsessed with whatever it is. Now I think this is a good point to talk about about learning itself. So, maybe just before we talk about that, democratic school at Sands, you decided everything. The pupil, like, this is what blew my mind when I first started hearing about this stuff. A school where the pupils decided, there was a weekly meeting at your school, right? Where everybody was there?
Yeah.
Teachers.
It's a weekly meeting with students and staff. Everyone has one vote and everything is decided. Hiring and firing of staff, acceptance and expulsion of students, school rules, school trips, subjects being taught, whatever. Like everything's taught. But the student body have the power because there are more students than there are staff. Probably,
Correct.
I don't know, 4 or 5 to 1 or something.
Yeah.
Maybe 6 to 1. I don't know. I don't know what the ratio is, and I don't know what the ratio is these days. It's a very small school.
Mm.
It works because it's small. It's certainly within Dunbar's number. I don't think it's even, I don't think it's even crossed the 100 threshold. I think it's somewhere around there. But it was small when I was there. It was, 50 odd students.
And when you were there, they said to you don't have to go to lessons.
I don't even know if they said it.
It was just part of the. You don't have to go to lessons, and then your reaction to that.
There's an expectation that if you choose to do a subject, that you go to those lessons.
Okay.
Choose to do English or drama or whatever, you go to your English or your drama lessons. But you don't have to.
What did you do when you first went there? You didn't. Okay.
I spent 6 or 8 weeks. At the time, one of the school rules was, and this isn't the case anymore, that you could smoke at a certain portion of the garden, like it had a very, very long garden, like a couple of 200-300 yard garden, and the bottom section you could smoke in. There was a summer house there, and you could smoke down there. Can't do that anymore. School rules have changed. The meeting said otherwise, but back in the mid 90s, you could do that. So I spent most of my days just like hanging out with whoever else wasn't in a lesson at that point, and that would change through the day. And I was like, can't make me do anything. And then at some point I realized that they weren't going to make me do anything. I was like, right, what do I want to do? Like, if no one's going to make me do anything, what do I want to do? And then I had to think for myself, well, what do I want to do? I was like, all right, well, now I actually want to do maths, and I want to do English, and I want to do, I forget what I did, photography again. I did my photography A level. I did my maths A level. I did my 2 English GCSEs. I did general studies, and just because I was interested in things generally.
We had to do general studies. I got an A in it. It was my best grade at A level.
I don't think I even did it. I think I got a U because I didn't do the exam. Like, I think I was submitted for the exam, and I don't know, but I was just interested in stuff.
Yeah.
And general studies, what a brilliant subject for someone like me. Like, it's general. Amazing.
Don't think they have it anymore.
I forget what else I did, but I spent a lot of my time juggling again. And then I graduated, and I went graduated. School came. Oh, and I also helped co-organize a international conference on democratic education.
Okay.
Which was called IDEC, International Democratic Education Conference. And two of my friends had stayed on at SANS for an additional year to be the organizers of this annual conference, which was being hosted by SANS that year. This is I think this is like 1997, I think. And I decided that I want to help organize that event. So they were the lead organizers, and I was on their team of 5 or 6 people, which included, mostly, if not exclusively, students. And I'm sure that some of the staff got involved and helped where needed. But
is that still going? Do you know?
Yeah. And there's another one that kind of branched off, which is UDEC, which is the European Democratic Education Conference. UDEC, EUDEC.
Yeah.
You can find them both pretty easily by searching. So yeah, that's what I did. I spent my time organizing a conference, going to my lessons. SANS really saved my life. If I hadn't dropped out of school and been home ed for a while, I probably would have been dead, pretty quickly. Like, I was on a bad path.
I don't think in all the time I've known you, I don't think I've heard you say that.
Yeah. Coming out of school and being home ed probably hit the brakes on like the bad path that I was going down. But SANS turned it around and started me on a better path. Like, I grew up. I grew up, I got responsible. Not like I was to blame for anything, just I took responsibility for my life. Like, oh, this is my life. Okay, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
It's where I started to get interested in learning, I guess, and, specifically in juggling. And, after leaving there, I went to work at a summer camp for a couple of years, and I taught juggling at a summer camp.
Taught juggling, different level.
Yeah. I went to one of those Camp America, what do you call them? Like expos.
Like an open event.
Yeah, like a big open event where, hundreds of camp directors come together and set up the table, and, people go and, kind of mooch around the building and look at brochures and talk to people and decide which camp do you want to go to. Funny story, actually, I've probably never told you this. So I was like walking around, and I got chatting to one camp, and I was able to pronounce the name correctly, which was Madapanai.
Okay.
And they're like, "Oh my God, you like pronounce this like correctly?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know this camp. I think my parents worked here 500 years ago."
Okay.
I got chatting to them, and like they were really great, and I was really keen to go to that camp, because I think I'd found out that my cousin was going there that year. Right?
Okay.
My cousin in the States was going to go there, but it was an all girls camp, and I didn't want to go to an all girls camp. Anyway, I carried it, but they said, "Look, if you want to come, you can come." And I was like, "Okay, great. I've basically got a job offer, but I'm going to keep mooching around."
Yeah.
Then I got chatting to the second camp, which was called Timberlake Camp, and I got chatting to the director of the camp, whose name was Jay something or other.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think he's really well known in the camp industry, right? Jay.
Is it bad that I'm thinking about Friday the 13th?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so I got chatting to him, and I said, "Look, I'm really looking for somewhere where I can teach juggling." And he's like, "Great, we can, you could do that. That'd be amazing. We've never had juggling, blah, blah, blah. We'll buy some equipment and, do all this stuff."
Yep.
And he said, "Oh, we can help you with a visa." I said, "No, don't worry. Don't need help with a visa. I've got an American passport." It's like, "Really? Why have you got an American passport?" I said, "Oh, my mom and my family are from the States." He went, "Oh, whereabouts?" I said, New York. He went, oh, I'm from New York. Whereabouts? I said, Long Island. Oh, really? Whereabouts? I said, well, my mum grew up in Great Neck, but my family now are in Syosset. I went, oh, really? What are their names? Oh, no. He said, which temple do they go to? Like, which synagogue? Right? Which I think is... I said, I can't remember. He said, if I said it, do you think you'd know it? I went, yeah, maybe. He went, is it North Shore Synagogue? I went, yeah, I think that's the one. He went, what are their names? I said, Anne and Bob Merrill. He went, oh, yeah, I know them. Thankfully, he'd offered me the job before the family connection. So I felt like I'd really earned the job rather than like it was just because he knew my aunt and my uncle.
Well, I'm not surprised. This happens to you all the time. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. Anyway, so that's what I did. I went out there. I went to summer camp. I taught juggling at a summer camp. And then I came back and I went to circus school. So my time home edding and at democratic school was not wasted by juggling. It got me into circus school and got me my degree.
What did they ask for when you went to circus school as an entry requirement? Did they have any?
Yeah, it was a 2-day audition. So they were looking for a certain level of physical capability and skill, and they were looking for potential.
Okay.
Both technical potential, like I was a juggler. Did I show that I had the potential to learn more? I mean, it was 2 full days and very full. They were exhausting.
Wow.
And we got put through our paces with everything. Like we did like a juggling session and a dance session and an aerial session and an acrobatic session and a theater session and a whatever. It's like we got put through our paces to see like could we and then the second day we had to perform an audition piece. And so they were looking for like, what's your current level and how do you respond to these workshops and do you show that you can learn and you have potential?
Wow. I never knew all that.
Yeah.
I knew some of the bits about the school, Steiner, democratic school, but not the getting into circus school and the I knew juggling was the theme. I taught myself to juggle when I was I must have been about 12 or 13. We had these plastic balls that were kicking around the house, and I taught myself. I didn't look at anything. I was going to say online. There was no internet then. No. I didn't look at anything on TV. It was just how do I juggle, and I figured it out. Just like, and then that's how I taught myself. Yeah. And I think is the term a reverse cascade?
Yeah.
So it was.
I don't know. Almost reverse cascade is this way,
right?
A regular cascade is this way.
So I would throw that there, then that there, like that.
If you throw underneath the incoming ball, that's a regular cascade. If you throw over the top of the incoming ball, that's reverse cascade.
So I taught myself regular cascade then. Everyone. I remember my family being really impressed that I taught myself that.
It's an impressive thing to be able to do.
It was a summer holiday, and I thought they were kicking around. I thought, yeah, let me try it.
Yeah.
And I think a good way to kind of bring it to a close is to start talking a little bit about what do you say? This is quite a big question. What do you say learning actually is? And the reason I'm saying that is people think learning is sitting in a room with someone who knows more, supposedly telling you information, and you take in the information and you're able to reproduce it. That's learning.
Someone might be John Taylor Gatto or John Holt. I think it's one of the two of them. I can't remember who says that learning is the product of the activity of the learner.
Okay.
or the result of the activity of the learner.
Okay. I like
Because
that.
the thing is, you're always learning.
Yeah.
There's never a moment when you're not learning.
Yep.
And learning often doesn't look like what you think of as learning, especially if you think of it within the box of school. Learning looks a particular way in school.
Mm. Mm.
But there's as much learning to be had from climbing a tree or kicking a ball around or
Yep.
walking on sand, or like the brain is always learning.
And yet, people have no issue when they're talking about a baby being a sponge and a baby learning and a baby playing and exploring and sticking things in his mouth and all of that. That is learning, and parents will do everything they can to allow that to have a stimulating environment for the baby. That's all really important for their development and their learning.
Yeah.
But then something happens, like, oh yeah, when they're about 4, send them to a completely strange place with then out without their parents, and just then that's learning.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty scary.
I didn't have to take Albie and like lift him up and stand him up and then put one foot in front of the other over and over again, and to try and get him to walk. He looked, he saw, he recognized it as something important and relevant, and went, all right, I can do that. And then he tried and he fell. And then he tried. And he tried and he fell. And he had no problem falling.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of the big things about that I experienced in school with learning, is that making mistakes is bad. And the pressure on young people in schools to get a high grade and not make mistakes is so high that they will resort to plagiarism to show that they know, but they don't know and they haven't learned it.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. And at one point, 10% of the year group I was in charge of at my school were on medication for anxiety.
How many?
10%.
Wow. Yeah. Do you know the rates of depression and young person childhood suicide and depression go up during term time and down during the holidays?
Well, that makes sense, quite frankly.
Yeah,
it does. And the Peter Gray, who wrote Learning Through Play, I think it was the name of the book. I don't know what it was. It was Peter Gray. He wrote a really interesting article about how much play has been eroded from the experience of children's lives. And as play has gone down, the mental illness has gone up. I remember when I was young going and riding my bike with a couple of people I just happened to know who lived around near where we were. Yeah. We'd ride bikes, climb trees, kick balls around, play cricket, go swimming, like all of that. And then other times when I'd meet people when we went on holiday and meet other young people, we'd make up games. It was like pure randomness. My sister and I would make up games as well. And it was that process of play is so important. So important.
Yeah.
So to go back to the question I asked you that I don't think you gave an answer to, what would you say learning is?
Well, I think that quote does say it. I wouldn't want to. I don't have a good definition myself. That's about as good a definition as I've ever found, because we're always learning. So learning is the product of the activities of the learner.
I like the part of the reason I like that so much is because the emphasis is on the learner and the learner's activities and what they are doing, what they choose to do.
Like for me, digging into a topic, like, I don't know, the state of the economy, and watching YouTube videos and reading articles and blog posts and listening to podcasts about the economy is play for me. I enjoy it. I have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm learning. Like, why? Because it's the product of the activity that I'm taking part in and I'm doing. And learning's always happening in school. It's always happening in school. It may not be that what they're learning is the history topic or the psychology topic or the math topic,
or what the teacher's intending,
or what the teacher's intending, but they are learning something. They might be learning, I'm no good at this. They might be learning, I'm not interested. They might be learning, I hate school. They might, they might be learning any number of things. They might even learn, God, history is really interesting.
The book I was talking about is by Peter Gray, and it's called Free to Learn.
Yeah.
And the subtitle is Why Unleashing the Instinct to Play Will Make Our Children Happier, More Self-Reliant, and Better Students for Life. Yeah. I love that book.
Yeah, it's over here on the bookshelf.
So I might have to reread it, but it's learning is, and then the other side to defining learning is what happens in the brain when we learn, how the cells split and form more and more connections, and the ons and offs, the lighting up that happens in the brain happens, and the patterns that go on in the brain. It'd be so. Imagining what was happening in my nephew's brain as he tried to walk, or as he watches me do some ridiculous thing and then tries to climb. He watched me climb a tree. We were walking in the park, and I was like, I'm going to climb this tree. And I climbed up the tree, and he looked at me like I was a nutter. He was like, what? I said, yeah, just climb a tree. That's what you do. He was really shocked. I think he was 9 at the time.
Right.
He's just not seen anybody do that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a shame, really.
Yeah.
I was doing that when I was 9. I was. Yeah.
I remember one time my next door neighbor and I were playing, and the game that we'd invented was throw a dart up and down the garden to each other.
Okay.
Maybe 20 or 30 yards, something like that. It was like lobbing this dart together.
And what, did you have to catch it, or was it just see where it landed?
No, we were just letting it like land in the grass, and then we'd pick it up and we'd throw it back. It was like a game of catch, and then it hit me in the leg, and it went like right in the thigh, right, and it went right, like the point went all the way in, right up to the weight, right, so like an inch and a half or something, straight in, and I looked at it and went, oh, and I pulled it out really quickly, didn't even bleed.
How old were you?
It was 10, maybe, something like that, 9.
I can imagine my nephew, who's 10 now, completely freaking out, rather than just going, oh. Yeah. These, I do. The future is going to be interesting, and teachers and schools and young people are going to, I think it's worth discovering what you really love and just keep doing more of it, like juggling or whatever it is.
Now, you and Willem have had a conversation or two about that, right?
Probably. But so that all starts from a pupil asking me, or one of Willem's pupils asking him a question. And we've been asked things like, how do I discover what I love and get paid for it? Or how do I get paid and do what I love? Or things like that. And we end up referring to Alan Watts, Ikigai, and knowing yourself, having the space to discover for yourself what you love and exploring.
Yeah. That's one of the things that school really kills, is having the space to discover something for yourself and reflect. There's no time for reflection. And it's a really important aspect of learning, that once you've done the really intense investigation of whatever it is that you're at work on, whether it's, how many kick-ups can I do, or, the world economy, or whatever. Like, you get really into it for a while, and then you let it be.
Yeah.
And that process kind of lets your brain recompile almost, and process, and work things out. How often, have you been like, oh, I really need to remember that thing, like it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't quite get it, and you think really intently. And I do this thing where I go through the alphabet, and I'm like,
okay,
with A, does it begin with B, does it begin with C? And like often it'll trigger, like I'll get to a letter.
wow.
And I remember it. It's but sometimes it doesn't. Right? Sometimes I go through the whole alphabet, maybe even a couple of times. I'll be like, I can't get it. And then I'll go away for an hour and my brain relaxes, and it's still, and then go, I remember.
Yeah.
That process of reflection after that intense effort is really important for the learning process. It helps the learning process, and it's totally killed in school.
Yeah. I'm sure he talks about that in How We Learn in that book.
Yeah, he does. And they talked about it very briefly in the book that I just started reading.
The Brain That Changes Itself.
It changes itself.
Yeah.
And I started reading it this afternoon, and I'm 2 chapters in, I'm 45 pages in. And he talked about it very briefly, just in a sentence or two somewhere, mentioned the importance of that. Reminded me of How We Learn that we mentioned at the beginning.
Well, I thought that was a great book. One of the things I'm planning on doing is getting all the main ideas from it, and then restructuring my lessons around the way the book is, which is much more difficult than I initially expected, because I'm trying to wedge it in around everything else I'm trying to do, whilst showing that I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Actually trying to just change it all underneath is quite hard.
Yeah.
But who knows where it will go next. I'm excited to see what I'll be doing in 3 years' time, whether I'll be a teacher or not. I don't think I will. I think I'll be doing something else. I'm exploring. But let's talk about moustaches to end.
Okay.
Just before we talk about moustaches, the Gallup strengths thing, learner is one of your favorite things, learning. But what I found interesting is you also command, woo, communication, responsibility. So what I found interesting is how much you said you referred to watching something and then reading an article and listening to a podcast, and how much that information, whereas I would read something, probably a book first, and then I like to take a step back and notice what other things it makes me think of, and then who else do I know that I could go and speak to, and I like to suck it all in and then think about it. And one of my top 5 is input. I collect articles to read, and then I'll read them, or ideas, or even to a certain extent people that I know, and then I'll see connections between something you've said and something Davina, my wife, said, and then something I've read, and then I'll put it all together to form this ball of ideas that sometimes comes out in a garbled mess. Yeah, because it makes sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to anyone else.
That sounds like your connectedness. Both who do I know that I could talk to?
Yep.
Right. There's that connectedness, as well as, I can connect this idea to that idea. What you said and what Davina said.
Connectedness is my number one Clifton strength, and I was rereading the descriptor for it for my appraisal, and it said something like an intuitive understanding that there's a reason behind everything, something like that. So very disparate but big, something like ideas at the same time.
A belief in the underlying connection of all. I think it's all people or all things or something like that.
Yeah, they've rephrased a lot of them. They've had a big update. Yeah. yeah, and change some of the colors that they were using, and the phrasing of on the list of the 34 themes, possible themes that you could get when you do the test. The phrasing of some of the descriptors has changed.
Hmm.
So it was worth.
I have to go see if my report's been updated.
I don't know if the report will be updated, but I think the app is great. They've changed it around a lot. There's a lot more suggestions of practical things you can do on a daily basis.
Okay.
Highly recommended.
Recently updated?
Yeah, I would say so.
When
If
are we
you
talking?
looked at it, probably in the last 6 months, I noticed a big difference going in and then coming up with an idea for what you can do to apply something from your top 5 themes.
Cool.
I think it's really good.
Yeah.
So that's the combination of, that's why it's called join the dots forward. I join the dots forward. Adam talks and learns and tells me what to do. No, he doesn't. We tell each other what to do.
The next thing that I'm going to be getting into is I just signed up for a course called the Essentials of Elite Performance.
And you sent me a link to it.
I sent you a link to it. That's the manual that I printed off today. But it's a movement-based neurology program. It takes a neurocentric approach to movement. So rather than just a biomechanical look at movement,
Instead of how big your muscles are, how do you use your brain?
not even it's not even, no, not quite. I wouldn't say it like that.
I'm trying to simplify it.
I know, but it simplifies it in the wrong direction slightly. It's not about how big your muscles are. It's and it can include how strong you are, but how strong you are is highly dependent on your brain's perception of how much threat is there. You ever done that arm bend test? I do.
This might be something we start next week with.
We
neurology.
We can't really do it because I'd need to be there with you because it's a physical test. But you could do it with someone, right? You could do it with Davina or whoever. It doesn't really matter. What you do is you get someone to hold their arm out straight,
mm-hmm.
and then let's see. They got to try and keep their arm straight.
Yeah.
Keep their arm straight. No, sorry. They got to try and bend their arm.
Okay.
Which way are we going? Oh man, I'm totally messing this up. You've got to try and keep your arm. Man, like end of the day, like my brain, I can't even work out which way I'm going. If you were doing it, I would hold you and you would try and
push against.
I would try and bend your arm. You'd try and straighten your arm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I would try and bend your arm. You would try and straighten your arm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And what you'll find is most people are incredibly strong and they can resist it, right? They won't let you buckle their arm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then all they do whilst you're doing that, whilst you're trying to bend their arm, is they take their head back. So from here, just go chin up as far as they can. Okay, not leaning, just the head, right? Just looking up. And there's a point where all of a sudden their arm just goes bump, and they lose all capacity to keep their arm straight.
Because, or is this the teaser for next week?
No, we can give it out. It's fine.
Okay.
Because the moment the spine gets into a hyperextended position, it's at risk. There's a threat to the spine. When your spine's in this position, all of a sudden, your arm is no longer the most important thing. That's not important. That's not going to protect your survival. This is survival.
Wow.
If something happens to your neck, you're a goner. So the brain diverts its attention and energy away from the arm to the neck.
Wow.
And you lose power in your arm. It's got nothing to do with your muscles. It's got everything to do with your brain.
Very interesting.
Um,
And what I meant by saying how big your muscles are versus the brain is to contrast two approaches. So one
yeah,
approach might emphasize strength being about how you use your body and what you do with your body and how you develop your muscles. But the approach that you're talking about is how the
it's
brain
not even. It's
interacts
not even
with.
that. It's
It's
not
not even
even
that.
that. No, it's everything. It's everything that you do. Everything that you do
Mm-hmm.
begins with the brain. Whether it's kick ups with a football, or lifting weights, or walking, or singing, or whatever.
Mm.
It's not nodding your head. It starts with the brain.
Because I've started the tap tap drill you showed me, and I think it's beginning to enhance my guitar playing
Yeah.
because I'm trying to do Metallica really fast. I don't know how he does it so fast, all down strokes. I was like, doesn't he is it strength? Is it how does he do it? How does he do it? And I've watched videos of him, and I just Master of Puppets is 220 beats per minute, right? And I can just about do it at 190. That's still 30 beats per minute slower than the actual song. It's
Wow.
ridiculous. So it's a technique thing, not a strength thing. I don't know what it is, but
It's a
the
brain thing.
tap, the tap tap. But that's how I used to think. Well, that's what I was thinking. Is it a technique thing? Is it? But now the tap tap drills, I think, are beginning that help my guitar playing.
Now, it could be anything, right? It's not
Mm.
necessarily anything to do with your arm.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your brain has to work too hard on your visual system,
Mm-hmm.
or your
Sometimes,
vestibular, system.
sometimes I will close my eyes and play. It doesn't make any difference. But yeah,
But you wear glasses,
true.
or maybe it's your breathing.
Mm.
Maybe it's how your body moves its ribs, or how your brain moves the ribs. It could be any number of things. Maybe it's your balance.
Mm.
Maybe it's your spinal stability. Maybe,
Mm.
don't know, right? But if your brain has to put additional attention somewhere else, it will
Mm-hmm.
limit how much you can do in the activity that you want to do. Right? If your
Yeah.
arm is way out here at full extension, you're
Mm-hmm.
less strong. Your muscles haven't changed, but there's a much greater risk to your shoulder popping out of its joint.
Mm-hmm.
So your brain won't let you lift as strong a weight.
Mm-hmm.
You're weaker in that position, not because your muscles are any different, because your brain doesn't let you, because it's risky. There's a threat out there, just like there is in the neck extension. So this program is about how do you assess and address your biomechanics, starting from the neurology. They take what they call a neurocentric approach, or a neurobiomechanical approach to movement.
And we should talk more about this next week. Will you have started it?
I might have dipped into it. I don't
Okay.
think I'll have started it full on, but I have been working my way through part of it as a bit of an introduction, because they offer in excerpts from it as part of an introductory course, which I think is worth doing. No matter what you do, it's got some really good exercise in it, but it takes it's not a they set the bar pretty high for what it takes to work with that methodology. It's not like, top 5 things you can do.
No, it's really interesting stuff, and we might have to talk a bit more about it next week.
Yeah, but that's we talk about learner, and I like to learn stuff. Like this is my
Your
next
next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you seem to gradually segue between different things through the year, and
Yeah.
occasionally something will interrupt if it has to, like buying a car. But you've
Well, it's also it's not entirely unintentional. It's a little bit unintentional.
there's a self-interest in this as well.
there's definitely self-interest, and it's
The
self.
pain.
I have agency, and I can.
No, I mean like you're dealing with pain.
No, nothing to do with that. This
No,
is
really? Okay.
no, like at my interest shifts from, I don't know, getting intently into vegetable gardening to the economy to neurology to investing to home ed to like whatever, right? The interest ebbs and flows, and I used to like beat myself up about that I'd get really into something and then I'd kind of leave it, and then I'd get really into something else and then I'd kind of leave it. But what I found is each of them sort of ebbs and flows, but it now tie it back with what we were saying about those periods of intense effort and learning, and then the periods of consolidation. When I realized that, I was like, oh, it's okay to do that. Like, it's not just okay, but it's actually beneficial to let my interests ebb and flow in that way. And sometimes it will be somewhat circumstantial. Sometimes it will be, guided by my own interest. Like you say, like right now, I'm being guided a little bit by pain, that I want to do this to improve my body movement and movement quality and reduce the amount of chronic pain that I have, because I've had chronic pain for 25 years.
Wow. Okay.
25 years. And I've just started to realize how detrimental that's going to be to me in 10 or 20 years time. Now that I've hit the 40 threshold, I'm really noticing a difference in my body from when I was 35 or 30. And I'm also moving a lot less than I ever have in my life. So it's become a concern for me, not a worry, but it's become an area of importance.
Learning that you're going to learn about.
Yeah, that I want to learn about now. I want to dig into it in some way. Gardening was important March, April, May, June, in part because I was concerned about supply chains breaking down with COVID around the world. In part because, the weather was great, March, April, May, June, and it was spring. It was like, spring and early summer, that's the time for gardening.
Yeah.
So it was like somewhat circumstantial that I was getting really into gardening and, no dig gardening. Now we've cleared the garden. There's not masses to do out there. There's a little bit, but I don't need to be like quite so in.
This is why conversations with you are so interesting, because we've moved through so many topics in the course of this, and there's always something really interesting that you can bring to it, and it moves. I love that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And it's very different to conversations I have with other people, because it moves broad and occasionally deeper than you might think.
Yeah.
There's a breadth, but also a depth to the conversations. Whereas other people I know prefer just breadth.
Yeah.
My mum is lots of things breadth. My dad is very few things super in depth.
Yeah.
Whereas my sister's like.
Yeah, and I'm somewhere in between. I'm somewhere in between. I'm like breadth with depth in a few select things, but never as deep as people that I would consider to be real experts. I'll go deeper than most, but I'm not like a specialist.
Yeah.
Even in circus, which has been my career for 20 years, like people would look at me and be like, oh yeah, you're an expert. And I am, but I'm also a generalist.
Yeah.
It's why I teach juggling and acrobatics and flying trapeze and tight wire and stilt walking and Diablo and unicycle and, whatever else. And there are not many people that will teach as many things as me to the degree that I'll teach them, but you'll be able to find people in any one of those things who will go further. I'm not as specialist as any one of them, but take any of the specialists, and they won't be as broad as me.
And this ties with the whole theme of today's conversation about learning, but it also ties in with knowing your strengths and playing to your strengths and appreciating them.
Knowing who you are and what you're interested in, and how you work. Like, how do you work? You know, you approach learning and inputting, right? That's your strength, right? Input in a totally different way to me.
I'm massive.
I just find that most people I speak to don't have the knowledge and information that I'm looking for.
Well, what I'll do is, and what I'm very good at, is joining it all together through people, but also I'm quite happy to wing it.
Yeah.
And intuitively trust that I'll join the dots forward.
Yeah.
Whereas I know sometimes you're like, what do we talk about? And I'm like, don't worry, it'll be fine.
I don't worry about it. I just want to know kind of roughly where we're aiming. Which direction are we going? Are we going north, south, east, or west?
And that doesn't make any difference to the conversation, even when we choose it. So I'm happy with it, but I know like you might want a general starting point, even if we end up over there.
Yeah.
My headphones just told me my battery's low.
All right. Well, that's probably a good point to finish. Just to tie that together for me in terms of how I learn, I just remembered that my Gallup Strengths Finder report, or Clifton Strengths report, it's probably in the learner bit that it says this. It says something really explicit, like, you like to listen to experts.
That never a truer word was spoken.
I know, right? But that's why I'll read the book, I'll listen to the podcast, I'll do the YouTube videos, it's like I'm really good at finding experts in these things and whittling them down to the ones who like can communicate things in a really great way. I'm like, it's brilliant. But yeah, like Gallup totally nailed me on that one.
Go and revisit your report. Go and log in again and see if it's changed. It'd be interesting to know.
I think I might have seen it since, if it was like within 6 months. If it was within 6 weeks, I probably wouldn't have seen the change. But within 6 months,
the colours have been in the last 6 weeks.
All right, well, I'll definitely go and take it.
Have a look. Great. And next week, well, we'll pick something. Who knows what it's going to be?
We'll pick something.
Yeah, maybe something about the brain and body movement, something like that. And maybe getting old. Growth.
Oh, we haven't talked about moustaches. We haven't talked about moustaches, James. That was our interlude before moustaches.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry, it's coming. But growth, I think, is going to be next week's theme. Yes, moustaches. Okay. I'm going to be clean shaven next week with the beginnings of a moustache, as is Adam. We are raising money for Movember. And I did a pre-sponsorship, pre-shave. And I'm at 200. Yes, £200 now already.
You're still at 200.
Yeah, it hasn't gone up since. I haven't really done much more
since we spoke yesterday. It hasn't gone up.
It hasn't gone up. So Adam and I are going to be doing it as a team. I'm obviously going to look much better with a moustache than Adam. So
yes,
definitely. But I don't know what I'm going to grow.
Nobody else knows. Like, not even Lauren knows at this point that I'm doing it. I haven't even told her yet.
You should probably tell her.
I might just like come down on November 1st, like clean shaven, freak Lauren and Albie out.
Oh, God.
Clean shaven.
It has, hasn't it? Yes. It was relatively recent for me. So I'm going to put the sponsorship link here, and along with most of the references I can remember we talked about. And there will be, next week. We'll put it in next week. I think growth is going to be the theme next week. I've decided. That's what the theme is, because that opens up lots of things: economy, growth, moustaches,
growing, the brain growing, children,
strengths, children, getting old.
All right,
there you go.
I can go with that.
Great.